So, welcome to trip 4 of the Rouge UnCruise, sponsored by Friends of the Rouge, promoters and advocates for the watershed of all watersheds. This year, our annual Rouge Cruise is virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, we deemed it an UnCruise. While we miss seeing you in person and wish you could be out on the river with us tonight, doing so could potentially expose you to an illness that has taken over 6,700 Michiganders. Instead, hop on board Sally and Paul's kayak and visit the Rouge River from a new perspective, seeing places the Diamond Bell could not reach and hearing from different voices about the projects and entities that shaped its history and make the river what it is today. Narrated by Rouge Board and staff, we trust that you will learn new things and enhance your sense of place with a historic and dynamic Rouge River. This trip 4 has 2 unnarrators. I am Sally Petrella. I'm the monitoring manager at Friends of the Rouge, where I also work on our water trail. Along with narrating tonight, I was the lucky one to paddle the Rouge in my kayak with a GoPro camera, with the assistance of my husband, Paul, and he's here with me tonight, so you better stick your head in and just say hi. Yeah, he just wants to show his hand. So. And here's our second unnarrator.
Hi, I'm Orin Gelderloos, Professor of Biology and Professor of Environmental Studies at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. I recently retired from active teaching, but I continue my research on the ecology of the floodplain on campus as a research associate at the Environmental Interpretive Center. I am also pleased to be a member of the Board of Directors of the Friends of the Rouge. This is the 4th segment of the trip that we started on August 11 at Zug Island and will end on September 8 at Fairlane Estate at the University of Michigan. Tonight, we'll pick up the Schaefer Road Bridge and end at Hubbell-Southfield Combined Sewer Overflow Facility. On September 8, on the olive portion of the map, we'll conclude this series by showing you the restored oxbow at Greenfield Village, Fairlane Estate, and the new fish passage and floodplain forest at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. Here's a close-up map of tonight's trip. We start at the Schaefer Road Bridge and check out the swift cliff swallows, meet Dearborn Fire and Rescue, conclude the end of the trip of 200 million gallons of water that started on trip 1, learn about plans for an accessible kayak launch, hear plans to remove part of the concrete channel, and we'll visit the largest CSO facility in the Rouge River watershed. As we travel, we will want to reflect on the connections and importance to our daily lives of all the sites and structures and functions we see, all the things that are out of sight and out of mind. Well, we say, don't put those in my backyard. As we pick up where we left off last week's tour, the Schaefer Road Bridge is up ahead of us. Before we reach it, we're going to pass under some overhead pipes and a railroad bridge. Now, thanks to EPA's Rose Ellison, whom we met in the first trip, we recently learned from her that the Union Carbide company installed the pipes in 1980, and they're color-coded. The green pipe moved oxygen, and the black pipe moved nitrogen across the river. I didn't know that. Now we approach the Schaefer Bridge. In our area, cliff swallows commonly nest under bridges near water. We're going to see their nests here in just a moment because this bridge makes a really fine cliff for the attachment of a vertical wall and a horizontal overhang, and it looks like they made a jug. Clearly, they nest in a colony. Although they're gregarious, they fight to defend their nests from those other cliff swallows who would evict them. Well, both the male and the female contribute to the nest building by gathering mud pellets in their bills from stream banks close by or up to a few miles away. As you can see from the nest structure, its construction is not a trivial exercise. The nest has 900 to 1,200 mud pellets precisely placed. The walls are 1/4 to 3 inches thick, 3/4 inch thick, and they lay anywhere from 1 to 6 eggs. Right now, they may be raising a second brood at this time of the year. Although one pair looks after each nest, polygamy is common.
Oh.
Outside of the nest, you may be able to spot a cliff swallow in flight. It has a metallic dark blue back, a pale cinnamon rump, and white undersides. Cliff swallows look similar to the more common barn swallow, which has a forked tail rather than a square one, and a completely blue back. The barn swallows build similar nests to cliff swallows on a vertical wall, but they don't use the overhang. Now back to the cliff swallow. If the cliff swallow sits on this pose, you can see its rusty neck and face with a white forehead. These same characteristics of the pale-colored rump and the breast can be seen when they feed in flight, commonly in groups. They feed on flying insects such as flies, bees, wasps, ants, grasshoppers, damselflies, and basically those insects that fly in swarms over lakes and fields and rivers. Cliff swallows breed over most of the United States, but usually are found only in specialty nesting areas and food. We are fortunate to see them at this time of year. Cliff swallows are migratory and will be leaving shortly for South America.
Now we head under the Schaefer Bridge. Despite the growing popularity of kayaking the Rouge River and the 4 days it took us to kayak this route and film it, we only saw one other paddler who would not come with us. As we reached the Schaefer Bridge, we could make out a kayak with something pink on the front. As we got closer, we met Tom Dare, who's been kayaking this stretch for 15 years. He never did tell us the significance of that inflatable flamingo, but it certainly would help him to be more visible in the shipping channel. As we left that bridge, we encountered another boat. This one wasn't being paddled. This little rescue boat is part of the special operations team of the Dearborn Fire Department. And those guys were out on a drill that day. We were already aware of them because of a meeting that Friends of the Rouge held last year. As part of the development of the Lower Rouge River Water Trail, Friends of the Rouge held a safety summit where we brought together fire and police from 9 communities in Wayne County to talk about who would respond to a paddling emergency now that so many people are out there paddling. We learned a lot about who does what and worked with them to develop a safety plan for the trail. Dearborn is one of the few communities that has officers trained regularly in swift water rescue and has boats and personnel at the ready. So we got to know Lieutenant Jennifer Wenzel, and she let us interview her about Dearborn's preparedness for water emergencies and how you can keep yourself safe, as they would really rather that you not need them. She's here tonight, I'm hoping, in case you have any questions for her. So here she is.
Hello, everybody. I am Lieutenant Jennifer Wenzel. I am part of the Dearborn Fire Department. I'm also in the Marshals Bureau and on the Special Operations Team. Water likes to win, and it moves super fast and can be very deadly. And that's one of our biggest worries, right? Water takes out more people than fires every year, right? Our swift water numbers are always higher than house fire numbers. So water rescue, it's really particular that it's usually 1 or 2 people that get in trouble at a time. So it would not call for a big number of folks, but specialized folks. And we just found that in the city of Dearborn, we have enough possible issues with our steel plant, for our high angle rescue, and for our waterways that having our own team became priority to put it back in the budget to help fund that team. And our chief has done a great job with finding grants and finding the funding to keep us specialized and with proper gear to do our job well. As we realize that that water is going to start getting used like it should be and it's coming back to life, that we want to make sure our team is prepared because we have such a long stretch of that river. We do have mutual aid agreements with different cities along the river that if they called and needed some assistance between us and the NewStar team, we would make sure that those folks would be able to get a hold of resources and help those folks out. Because if it does come time to helping somebody, those county lines only matter so much. Life jackets are so key. right? People do not drown in life jackets usually. Like that is, we've had many years of no one drowned while having a life jacket on. I think buddy programs are great, right? Have somebody that has eyes on you. Chances of both of you going under at the same time are, cut your chances down. That's even more rare. If not, making sure you either have a GPS device or some type of device so you can understand where you're at. So if you do run into trouble, you're able to tell us kind of where you're at in the sites. And part of our training is understanding how to get to different parts of the river with different roads and how to bring a rescue in and how to get to these different tighter areas. 911 does help with water situations. So we don't want to be a part of your paddle trip unless we're on our day off and enjoying it with you. We have rescued a few dogs, and we've had some deer go through ponds, and sometimes we have to go get them too. So we did get called for a few people along the edge of the water, but not quite in, that has fallen down the banks of the water. We've had about 4 of those. So those do count as a rescue, but not a water rescue because they were right on the edge. So they were not, the water wasn't their issue. It was the steep incline that they had hurt themselves and was not able to get up from that incline. We did have a couple shepherds about 3 Februaries ago that were perched up in the middle of the river. They were exhausted and could not get themselves up out of the river. They had jumped down into the river and then couldn't make that wall back up. They couldn't get their footing. So we did get on our little rescue boat, and 3 of us went out to that location and got the dogs in our boat and then took them back. Did get them adopted out, and they made a full recovery. So that was like really great to see that people cared enough to make the call and find out what's going on with these dogs and getting us into action and knowing that our team exists. We're lucky to have you guys. We're very excited to see all the kayakers on the river, very excited to get this launched out and to start seeing this waterway be explored and start loving nature like we need to in this community. We're ready for it, and we hope everybody has a safe time and you never need us, because that is our goal, is that we are never needed. But if you are, we're here for you. And we just want everyone to know that. So.
Thank you very much, Jen, for the nice presentation. The care and concern for the safety and health of the citizens has increased greatly over the decades. In 1971, we had a summer institute sponsored by the National Science Foundation for middle school and high school teachers at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. We organized a canoe excursion on the river through this section before it was paved with concrete. Then we saw great blue herons, belted kingfishers, spotted sandpipers, and red-tailed hawks perched in the large elm trees and maple trees on the banks. Yet the water had many clumps of gray-green floating algae, characteristic of water polluted with sewage. Obviously, we're very cautious and did not make any body contact with the river in those years.
So as we continue up the river, we are passing by the underwater discharge from the cooling ponds from the steel mill. We thought we would get out and take a look at these ponds. So we paddled in and we took advantage of some of this debris here on the store and got up out of that kayak. So we're going to take you up and out, and we climbed up, and this is what we saw. These are the cooling ponds from the steel mill where that hot water goes to. So this is what they look like. It's a view from above. And let's take a minute to review how the water gets to these ponds. So as you may recall from the very first trip, 250 million gallons per day come in from the screen house on the old channel at Zug Island. It cooled the red hot steel in the foundry and in the mills. Then it was sent to the settling ponds to cool and let the particulate matter drop out of it. Now it goes back to the river right about here. AK Steel recycles 80 million gallons. In this photo, on the left, you can see some disturbance in the water. This is where the outfall is, but it's difficult to see the outfall coming out because it comes out deep underwater. On more than one occasion, we actually have seen oil bubbling from the surface.
A few decades ago, I was working again with middle school and high school teachers in the Summer Institute on the features and characteristics of our Rouge River watershed. One of the topics and exercises we did was to measure water quality. Obviously, dissolved oxygen was one of the measurements we made. On a given date, we had teams dispersed to various locations in the watershed to determine the amount of dissolved oxygen in the river. The next day, we reported our results. The higher the percentage of dissolved oxygen, the better the water quality, and any value lower than 5 parts per million is considered unacceptable for a reasonably healthy ecosystem of plants and animals. Well, on that occasion, and as to get as many readings as we could, I invited my wife Char out for a cheap date that evening. We decided to measure the dissolved oxygen in the industrial section of the river along Fordson Island, while everyone else went to the greener and more bucolic locations. We crossed over the bridge to Fordson Island, and here then, when the results of our tests were reported the following morning, guess what? The water with the greatest amount of oxygen was at Fordson Island. The highest dissolved oxygen concentration should be understandable, I think, due to the fact that the input from the settling ponds and the cooling ponds went back into the river at this point and oxygenated itself as it was going in. So please don't accuse my wife and I my wife and me from sloppy and inaccurate analytical procedures.
Orin, you know we never would.
Thank you.
So in the autumn, during migratory season, ducks and geese have a tendency to land on those ponds. If you ever paddled by there, you might notice a sound like gunfire exploding periodically, which is really a deterrent for them. Or I took a peek from the road the other day, and they had this inflatable tube man waving around, as well as this scary-faced bird. Hopefully this scares them off, as oiled birds do not fare very well. And this is a reminder that bird die-offs, especially of migrating ducks and geese, were common in the Rouge in the 1940s, especially in winter, when the only open unfrozen water was thick with petroleum. In 1948 that happened, and tens of thousands of ducks and geese died in a single weekend. Duck hunters, largely made up of Ford factory workers, were so appalled by this that they hauled thousands of these oil-soaked duck cadavers up to Lansing and deposited them on the floor of the Capitol building in Michigan's first environmental protest. As we return to the river by backing out of here, please take note of that red pole on your right that's a marker for the Schaefer treatment pond's outfall. For as long as we have been kayaking this stretch, beginning in 2007, this area by the outfall has been used as a fish camp. Perhaps like the DTE Energy outfall into the Detroit River, the warmer water coming out of the steel plant attracts fish, and fishermen and fisherwomen picked up on this. At any rate, chairs and other amenities have been dragged here with car seats, a good local resource, apparently. So back to this photo again from our 2007 trip. Note the red pole that I just pointed out in that last picture that was underwater, just to show you how high water is now in this section that's much more influenced by Great Lakes water levels. So back in 2007, that fish camp was so much more spacious. You had almost like a concrete beach. You could lay out your beach towel. And these fish campers had so much space that they even had their own caged bird. So flash forward 10 years later, and in 2017, we came upon this fisherman. First, notice how much concrete is sticking out. You don't see that today. Secondly, notice the fish he has. This large catfish with a forked tail is called a channel catfish. And since then, we have often seen these large fish pulled out of this section from here down to Melvindale. So I was curious as to how common these fish were. So I went back to the DNR's 1998 survey. This is the last extensive survey done for the Rouge River watershed until Friends of the Rouge started sampling in 2012. I was surprised to see that the channel here was completely devoid of any channel catfish. The only ones that we had in the Rouge were up on the middle branch here, and they were most likely stocked. I also checked the 2004 University of Michigan Atlas in 2004 and found none. But in 2016, the DNR caught probably the first 3 near Fairlane Dam, and only a face a mother could love. These channel catfish, or also known as channel cats, are North America's most numerous catfish. They actually prefer clean, well-oxygenated water. They have taste buds over their entire body, especially on their whiskers that have 25 taste buds per square millimeter. They are predators eating other fish, crayfish, frogs, worms, and crickets. They lay their eggs in crevices, hollows, or debris to protect them from the swift current. This may be key as to why they were able to move into the Rouge around 2016. Water quality had improved by then such that dissolved oxygen levels were generally high enough, and the higher water levels gave them more access to vegetation and debris to spawn in. This is now a common sight that we see over there at Melvindale. So this fisherman here told me that he uses ballpark franks to bait them. And he catches lots and lots of these big channel cats, and then he releases them. So as fishing for them becomes more and more popular, and we get a little bit concerned about people maybe wanting to eat them. So should they be eating them, or should they just be doing catch and release like he does? According to the Michigan Department of Community Health, for the Rouge River below the Fairlane Dam, catfish and carp should not be eaten. So if you look at this chart here, the better to eat fish, things like yellow perch and bluegill that eat zooplankton, are okay. When you get down to fish like catfish and carp that eat a lot of other fish and crayfish that would concentrate chemicals, you really should not eat them. So at this spot, you should not eat catfish from the Rouge River. They do recommend that there are better spots in the Rouge for catching catfish, like Newburgh Lake in Wayne County, where in 2009, 1,454 of them were stocked. So we are going to pause right now and take a short break to answer your questions. But before we do that, we wanted to give a special thank you to the 2020 Rouge UnCruise event sponsors, AK Steel, Smith Group, Ann Ivory Studios, Burns McDonald, Carmoose, Cardno, ECT, Giffords Webster, Honeywell, Mannix Smith, Marathon Petroleum Company, Midwestern Consulting, MJ Electric, OHM, and to all of the Rouge Cruise supporters. Thank you so much. So now I am going to turn this over to Marie, who has seen some of your questions.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for hanging in there in the very beginning when we had a couple of technical difficulties. Thank you to Orin and Sally for this great information. I'll start with a question that actually was meant for Ms. Wenzel.
All right, I'm here.
The question was from Fred Cowles. He said, when someone needs help and calls 911, not knowing where they are, how do you determine where they are and who will respond? It's a great question.
Yeah, we have actually in Dearborn smart GPS units that is part of our 911 system. So if, just like if a little kid calls and they're not sure of their address or where they're at, we actually can locate where that phone is by using GPS coordinates because of our tower system we have throughout the region, that we can locate where that phone is within about 3 meters. So we know where you are through that location. It's called Smart 911.
Wow, that's amazing. What an
Yes.
amazing amount of technology you have at your fingertips. Thank you so much, Ben, for that answer.
No problem.
Another question from Michael. He said, under Rotunda Drive, there's a stream that he presumes is the original course of the Rouge. It's just east of the channel. Is this true? Is it still connected to the channel? And is there any talk of reconnecting this piece, if not like they did with the Expo? Great question, Michael.
That was the original river. When they were deciding to build the river and channelize it, they took the dirt from the concrete section, the one they were digging, and they dumped it into the current meandering river. And so that was filled up. And then Oakwood Common, as is now Beaumont Common, needed a place to put their senior citizen home. Well, they put it in that spot there, but then they somehow or other felt that they had to have a water feature. And so they dug it all up and restored that part of it, which is connected down from the rotunda to the Rouge River. And you can go up that area. And because of the restoration of the river at that point, the people who designed it got an award. My suggestion originally was to leave the original river there and take the soil that comes from the river that they're going to dig and make some sliding hills out of it in Dearborn, so that at least on the north side of it, kids could have a good time going down the hill in the wintertime.
We will be talking about some plans with that channel a little bit later when we hear from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Great question.
Great, thanks, Sally. One last question, and we don't have any more right now, but Orin, do you know how deep the river is at this section?
Well, of course, it varies in the depth based in the water. This past weekend, it got well over our heads. We couldn't be able to walk through it. But otherwise, it's about 3 or 4 feet deep in the center. But the river in that particular part is it's on a V shape. The concrete goes down to a V shape. And so it varies depending on where you're standing in it. And the deepest part may be about 3 or 4 feet.
Thanks, Orin. All right, well, we'll shift it back to you, Orin and Sally, to keep us cruising along the river.
And here we go.
We're headed toward the Melvindale boat launch right now, and we're going to pass under the Greenfield Bridge. At this location in our upstream travels of the Rouge River, we see only vegetation along the banks. We don't see commercial enterprises as we did before. What may be a surprise is that in many places the concrete completely disappears and only vegetation is present. In fact, the concrete is still present, but nature is taking over, as it usually does. It may start with the seeds from a plant landing in a seam of the concrete. Next, some soil and organic matter land in the shelter of the seam. The plant puts down a root and a shoot appears, which traps more debris with nutrients. And we have a positive feedback system. Thus, over several years, we have the beginning of the patches and stretches of vegetation on the concrete. These plants have not only survived, but they flourish on the concrete against the challenges of floods, heat from the concrete in the summer, and ice flows in the winter. Well, who are these plants that are consuming carbon dioxide and water and making carbohydrates and oxygen? The most abundant plant along the banks is a common reed known as, by the scientific name of Phragmites. It's highly visible in dense clusters or wide swaths along the wet areas. Its feathery, fluffy plume is unmistakable. The plant has increased its cover extensively over the past several decades in southeast Michigan and has become invasive. You can control it as an option if you wish, in order to increase the diversity of other plants and animals in wetlands. Because the control herbicide is recommended, a person certified as an applicator should be appointed to make the applications. But the Phragmites is a welcome change from the concrete, and local wildlife take advantage of the cover. It provides a good cover for the 2 great blue herons that you'll see here in the Phragmites, and they're standing on the concrete channel right now. They're standing on there, and they sometimes wade into the water, and they stab a fish or 2 while they're there. What my question is, what does their liver look like, and what are the constituents of their liver and their kidneys? Well, we'll never find out because we don't capture them or do any autopsies on them or pathological studies. But it's an interesting question for me.
We see so many of them. So now we're headed towards the Melvindale boat launch, and it's getting more and more use by walleye fishermen as well as kayakers. It's adjacent to the former Melvindale ice arena that was converted to indoor soccer a few years ago and is now called Kessie Fieldhouse. The facility is a major amenity for Melvindale, though they have really struggled to keep it open over the past few years, given their distressed economy, and even had it up for sale at one point. It's currently closed due to COVID. In 2007, after kayaking the Detroit River with Riverside Kayak Connection, a Wyandotte-based kayak livery, I asked the owner, Tiffany, what she thought about kayaking the Rouge River down the stretch. She was game, so we put together an exploratory team that included Tiffany, Orin, Cindy Ross, who took the picture, and Mary Bowling and Dan. We paddled from Melvindale to the Detroit River and took out at Ballinger Park and River Rouge. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. And frankly, we were a little bit frightened. Right, Orin?
Right. Apprehensive is a good word, too.
So it was so interesting and successful that Riverside Kayak Connection has been organizing an annual trip on that stretch ever since, and it is their most popular trip, selling out every year. They had planned to hold it this year on September 12th, but they had to cancel it. But even if they had been able to hold it this year during COVID, every single boat that they were planning to rent out has already been sold due to the incredible surge in people buying kayaks. They're flying off the shelves like toilet paper. As a watershed organization that's been working since 1986 to restore, protect, and enhance the Rouge River watershed, what better way than for Friends of the Rouge to show true success and to get people to really love this dirty river than to get them out paddling on it. In 2011, we held an expedition to explore paddling from Canton to Dearborn. And we're so happy with the route that we have been working to develop this trail ever since. So the Lower Rouge Water Trail starts in Canton and goes through Wayne, Westland, Inkster, Dearborn Heights, and Dearborn, and that entire stretch is within Wayne County Parkland. And then it gets into the stretch that we've been highlighting on this UnCruise from Dearborn into Allen Park, Melvindale, Detroit, and River Rouge. We are working with these communities to develop the trail, but planning and developing a trail takes time and money. Our executive director, Marie McCormick, has tapped into regional interest in trails and found a variety of funding sources, including the Herb Family Foundation, the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, the National Kidney Foundation of Michigan, who is interested in increasing physical activity, SEMCOG, and the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. We were able to fund the design of an accessible launch for the Melvindale site and are seeking funding for the engineering plans next. I'm hoping to get that. So in addition to an accessible launch, the site is going to include some amenities like a pavilion, some porta potties, kayak lockers, some stormwater features to deal with some of the water on the site. The launch is going to make kayaking accessible to anyone, including those confined to a wheelchair. It'll move up and down with water levels since it goes up and down so much, and it will be brought in during the winter. We're working hard to find the funding for this so that anyone could come kayak the Rouge. Back to you, Orin.
Okay, next we're going to head under the railroad bridge with more cliff swallows flying under I-94. Beyond and above the river's edge, habitats of grass and shrubs are visible. Small mammals, such as voles and field mice, also live on the tender shoots of grass and forms. Of course, they're attractive to their predators, namely coyotes, which are surprisingly abundant in these habitats of low human populations. In fact, this section of the Rouge River was a prime location for a graduate student from Wayne State University to conduct his doctoral dissertation on coyote behavior in urban areas. We traveled several miles from the Rouge turning basin now by this time on a concrete-lined river that is straight as a die. On the horizon, in the far distance, we can see the Hyatt Regency Hotel at Michigan Avenue and Southfield Expressway. That's more than a mile away. Now, how did it come to this? What happened to the natural meandering river? Well, have you heard about the Great Flood of April 1947? During this flood, Henry Ford died at home in Fairlane with this historic photo of someone on the opposite side of the river. The flood waters extended to Greenfield Avenue, among other places. Electrical and telephone service were knocked out. Even the powerhouse at Henry and Clara Ford's estate was flooded out. The Rouge plant was shut down, as with most everything in the city of Dearborn. The only reported structural damage from the flood was the Dearborn Congregational Church on Rotunda. Nevertheless, even with that small damage, the huge flood event started a ball rolling to develop a flood abatement program for the Rouge River. The Army Corps of Engineers was and is in charge of such events. Plans and discussions were held for many years. Not until 25 years later, in the early 1970s, when the Fairlane Mall was designed, did we see some action. Obviously, the owners and investors of the mall wanted to have flood insurance. The insurance companies knew about the enormity of the 1947 flood, which covered the proposed site, and the potential insurers then determined that the risk was too great. Instead, Congress allocated $41 million for flood control, which involved constructing the 4.2 miles of concrete channel. The idea at the time was to move the stormwater flow out of the area as fast as possible and prevent flooding. At the same time, the Army Corps of Engineers stated that their environmental impact statement would guarantee that they would serve as a flood control until 1985. That was about a 10-year guarantee. The reason was that they could not anticipate how much more impervious surface would be laid down in the upstream part of our watershed. And the reason they can't plan that is we are averse to any land use planning on a regional basis in our areas. This coming black and white photo that you'll see here will show you the original river before the concrete channel was constructed. You can see the black dotted line that shows the newly constructed channel and the proposed channel. The destruction of the natural meanders and floodplains and the construction of the concrete channel caused a furor. A young civil engineer presented an alternative plan to the City Council of Dearborn in the early 70s. He suggested that the current channel remain and an overflow basin be constructed to abate the effects of flooding. He presented his concept to the City Council of Dearborn. In response to his plan at the City Council meeting, Mayor Hubbard only asked him, "Where do you live, boy?" He responded that he lived on the east side of Detroit in that area. Then Mayor Hubbard asked him something to the effect that, did he think that the city of Dearborn was not capable of handling the flood control problems and that someone from outside of Dearborn was more capable of dealing with Dearborn's issues? No one else said anything, but then that brief exchange basically closed the discussion, and there were no objections to the concrete channel from the City Council of Dearborn.
50 years later, we've realized that concrete is not beneficial to fish and wildlife like this yellow perch. As we work to restore the Rouge River watershed, it's apparent that 4.2 miles of paved riverbank is a major impediment for fish moving up from the Detroit River. The state and the EPA are now calling for the removal of the concrete to restore fish and wildlife related beneficial use impairments. But removing any or all of that concrete takes political will and funding. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, a federal funding program that supported the sediment cleanup that you heard about in the first trip, and that has widespread bipartisan support, has come to the rescue, the Rouge being one of the areas of concern and therefore funding allocated to it. So the EPA has tasked the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with figuring out how to remove all or some of the concrete to restore habitat and connectivity. The Corps is an engineering division of the United States Army that primarily oversees dams, canals, and flood protection to, quote, strengthen our nation's security, energize the economy, and reduce risks from disasters. We had a chance to talk to Paul Powell from the Corps, as they call it, about their current plans to remove some or all of the concrete, create wetlands, and reconnect some of the historic meanders as oxbows. They are focusing on the channel from Michigan Avenue to Greenfield.
Hi, my name is Paul Powell. I'm a project manager with the Corps. For the last couple of years, we've been working through the EPA to collect a lot of data to then start looking at the feasibility of any kind of habitat restoration we could perform in the upper 3 miles of the channel from Michigan Ave down to Greenfield. So we're just basically moving forward with that data, analyzing it, and getting ready to look at the feasibility of complete concrete removal, as well as some areas of opportunity we spotted where we could hopefully put some habitat in place.
To give you some perspective, the top photo is a 1968 aerial view before the channel went in, with a dotted line showing the plans. From Greenfield, there's not much change, just widening, but past 94, you see a meander to the left they eliminated, then a large one to the right that crossed Rotunda and circled around the Dearborn Congregational Church that got flooded in 1947. There's another meander to the left, then to the right where the Hubbell-Southfield CSO basin was installed that you will hear about shortly. Finally, there's the oxbow or U-shaped meander just south of Michigan Avenue that was recently restored and we will visit on Trip 5. On the below map, Paul's group has highlighted potential habitat restoration areas in blue and existing remnant stream channels in yellow.
The downstream end, we've got some land that we could maybe create some wetlands or some habitat. You see the brownish, looks like an oxbow at this point. It was actually part of the original river at one point. Some opportunity there for connectivity, you know, up and downstream, and habitat as well. It's kind of a nice isolated spot back in there, not really a lot of people. We've actually, we just completed some sampling in that oxbow there, and we did notice there used to be a connection with some storm sewers, but they're all like caved in and covered up, and I don't think anything's flowing through them right now. And up towards the CSO outlet, there's a couple opportunities there upstream of that to maybe do some more wetlands or, you know, some sort of habitat. We don't know yet. And then same with the one that's right by the old Henry Ford oxbow. So those are the areas along with complete removal that we're looking at currently. And we may find more, you know, as we proceed through the process. We had to get a bunch of rights of entry from all the people that own this property, and so this map was kind of serving double duty, kind of showing us who owns what, where we were able to get rights of entry. You can see the ones in blue we were not able to get rights of entry. The landowners were just not interested. There's 4 red lines there, right? Mm-hmm. The 2 outside lines represent the width of the right-of-way that the county owns for the project. So the Corps doesn't own the project, the county does. So I think it'll benefit if we can get some fish passage going and just some more green spaces, wet spaces. We're just happy to be involved, and hopefully after this feasibility phase is done, we will have something to move forward with design, and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Paul and the Corps, for listening to the will of the people and the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, which is led by Jen Tewksbury on this project. This restoration work in this area will help restore some of our beneficial uses of the Rouge. On a previous UnCruise, someone asked the question about the flow rate of the water. Now that we are in the concrete section, I think this diagram of flow rates is appropriate. In 2018, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, that you just heard, presented an assessment of the biological and habitats of the Rouge River, and the ones that Paul just mentioned. One part of the assessment was to measure the flow rate of the water at low flow conditions in the concrete channel, as well as in the channel above and below the concrete section. These diagrams show the flow rate in color in cross sections in the 3 reaches. The blue is the slowest and the red is the fastest. The red one is in the concrete channel. The rate that they have there is 1/3 of a mile per hour. Above the concrete section, that's up in the upper left, that's north of Michigan Avenue, the velocity is a raging 1/5 of a mile per hour. And in the downstream section, that's in the lower graph and cross section, it's 1/6 of a mile per hour. This is not the roaring Rouge River. At the same time, these data help us understand something about the biological communities of the river.
Just upstream of Rotunda, Friends of the Rouge had a surprising report from one of our members in 2012. Out doing bird surveys, Darren O'Brien had come upon adult stoneflies hatching out of the river. And this is actually the photo he sent. I guess that's his thumb. Stoneflies, or plecopterans for braided wings, are the most sensitive type of aquatic insect found in the Rouge. Requiring cold, clean, well-oxygenated water, they're only found in the healthiest part of the Rouge River. So what in the heck are they doing here? In the Army Corps biological assessment, that was part of what Orin had mentioned earlier, they assessed the concrete channel and for fish and benthic macroinvertebrates and reptiles and amphibians. For benthic macroinvertebrates, they found 21,488 individual benthic macroinvertebrates or bugs and 16 different taxa or types. And while that sounds like a diverse community, 93% of them were pollution-tolerant chironomids or oligochaetes, and none of the more sensitive families had more than 1 or 2 individuals. Chironomids, shown here, are the larvae of midges and can survive in polluted water, commonly known as bloodworms. They often are a deep red color from the hemoglobin stored in their bodies that helps them survive oxygen-poor conditions. Oligochaetes, like these tubifex or sewage worms, also sometimes called bloodworms. Let me just go back and show you them tubifex worms again, because they're all wriggling around. There we go. They're known to tolerate very low dissolved oxygen and even have some resistance to heavy metals. Only a few individuals in the pollution intolerant families like mayflies, shown here, and caddisflies were found, and no stoneflies. So though the stonefly that Darren found gives us some hope, there's much work to be done before the river is healthy enough down here to support a good population of pollution intolerant bugs and fish. So we are going to pause once again, but before we do that, I wanted to give a special thank you to our Rouge UnCruise champions. And these are people like you who love our river and have donated to support this program and our other educational programs. So I'm going to turn this over to Marie right now, and we'll take a little time to answer some more questions.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Orin, for all that great information. And thank you so much to our Rouge UnCruise champions as well. It's people like you who really care about the Rouge River that make such a difference. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I had a question from Deanna that asked, do we plan an overlook platform for the river? And I'm not sure if that question was asked in direct response to the designs for the Melvindale or just in general for the concrete channel rehabilitation. So do either of you want to answer that?
I don't know about that. We're talking mostly about restoration of the wetlands right now, and I'm sure one could be put in if they desire to do that.
Yeah, I don't know of any plans along the concrete channel. There's an overlook at the back of Henry Ford College, and there's plans at the Fort Street Bridge project that we talked about on trip 2 to put in a viewing platform for freighters. And then, of course, this planned accessible launch, you could go out and view out there. But, that's right now, the plans are just still in the works.
Thanks, Sally and Orin. I can add one thing to that. in some of the information that everyone will hear about next week in Trip 5, there is a planned greenway that will be adjacent to the Rouge River, which may have overlook features in it. That's in the works and down the pipeline, but I think there will be some great opportunities for Rouge River viewing from the shore as well. We had two questions really about Phragmites. The first question is from Teresa. She asked a relatively intriguing question. It says, in the case of invasive Phragmites, is its presence welcoming because it doesn't seem to be competing with any native species or on the concrete channel and provides beneficial habitat, or is it doing harm to the region in some way?
Well, it does compete with cattails. And in many places where we have the cattail marsh, the invasive Phragmites has taken over, and they're trying to remove it and make it into a more native species habitat.
Thanks, Orin. As a follow-up to that, there's another question from Griffin. He asked if there was any organized control of Phragmites along the Rouge that we're aware of.
I can speak to that a little bit. There has been some work. It's not organized, but Wayne County got some funding a few years ago, and they did a lot of Phragmites control in parks. And then that grant also extended to Fordson Island, so they did quite a bit of control there. And then I know that the Oakland County SISMA, it's a cooperative invasive species management group, is looking to do some within Oakland County. Wayne County has a similar group, but they're far more focused on the Detroit River. They don't seem to do this more kind of inland control. So really the answer is no, there is no organized control.
Thanks, Orin and Sally. I'll do one more question so we can move on. But Fred Cowles asked, well, he actually said a sort of a statement. Orin's question about the health of herons is intriguing. Can't biologists determine the health of these herons by collecting feathers or eggs?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. I would say I don't know about the eggs, and I don't know really whether you can do much with the feathers. We do isotopic analysis on feathers, but that's for a different purpose. Other than that, I don't know.
Okay, back to you, Sally and Orin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those great questions. We're now heading upstream to what was once the world's largest combined sewer overflow basin called the Hubbell-Southfield. We had a chance to talk with David McCord, is from the Great Lakes Water Authority. He oversees 5 Detroit facilities that prevent combined sewage from flowing into the river. So I got a chance to talk to him, and he told us a little bit about what these facilities do, which ones they have in Detroit, and what it's like to oversee them. It's a little bit like being a first responder like Jen. And he'll also tell you a little bit about what you can do to help these facilities be more effective.
Hi, my name is David McCord. I'm a team leader for the Great Lakes Water Authority Combined Sewer Overflow Facilities. Basically what we do is whenever we have snow melts or heavy rain or storm periods, the sewage collection system get overtaxed or overwhelmed, and our facilities take on that extra flow either by diverting it to our stations or either pumping it into our stations. We screen it from the trash and debris, and then we also treat it with disinfection in case we have to overflow into the River Rouge or Detroit River. We are first responders in that respect when it comes to storms. We have to be on alert. It becomes challenging to family members because they may not understand. You may be looking at a clear day outside, but if you get 2 inches of rain, we may be at work 3-4 days straight. On the Rouge, we have Hubbell-Southfield location. Baby Creek is actually a screening disinfection facility. So they have tunnels. Puritan Finkel, Hubbell-Southfield, and 7 Mile are actually basins. And Oakwood, which actually drains into the O'Brien, which leads to Rouge. We have alarms in our system and our facilities that they let us know that the levels in the sewers or the retention basins are getting high, and they'll automatically call us or call me, and then I'll call my team members in and dispatch them to the various locations. And they have to make their way through the storm to get there and start the equipment going. We also have been provided with remote monitoring on our cell phones so we can actually see what's going on and be prepared to make adjustments as we enter into the facility. I wish that, more people would actually know what we're doing and know their role, how they can help. Just the way you manage your home or your business with the grass clippings and blowing stuff in the road or throwing or littering. We get all of that stuff in our wastewater collection system. And it's very taxing. We're treating communities from stormwater. We're making sure that people's basements and businesses aren't flooding. And so it just gives you an overall sense of pride of what you do when you know that you successfully met your NPDES permit and you did not compromise anyone's personal property or the streets and roads or freeways.
Thank you very much, David, for those informative comments and graphic illustrations and pictures. For our UnCruise today, we are focusing on this Hubbell-Southfield retention basin. This is the 4th CSO treatment that we've observed. As you can see, the basin is covered with concrete and its workings are out of sight, out of mind, as the sewers are. Let's look inside at the details. On this next graphic, at the top of the figure, you can see where the influence of sewer comes in with the combined sewage to the basin during periods that David described when the interceptors are full and delivering their waste and rainwater to the water resource recovery facility. The first location for treatment is the bar screen and hypochlorite facility. The mechanically clean bar screens will remove thousands of objects of all kinds that are in the raw sewage. Things you flush down the toilet, objects that come into the sewer with rainwater, as David just has mentioned. These bar screens are like a vertical conveyor belt that screens and lifts the objects into a dumpster. Also at this point, sodium hypochlorite bleach is stored and pumped into the wastewater to kill bacteria with these pumps that you see. They've got to be in good working order at all times because we never know when they're going to get the rain. The next place that the water goes is into a retention basin. Here's a retention basin. It's just like a huge parking garage. You can see the channels there into which the silt and the debris and the grit will settle, and they then will be treated with disinfectant. In the first retention basin, the floatable materials will also get skimmed off. When basin 1 gets filled and the materials begin to settle out, the combined sewage goes off into the side of this into basin 2. If the combined sewage is less than 22 million gallons, it stays in these basins until there's room in the large interceptor. Then the pumps discharge the water and sludge to treat the facility on to the treatment facility on Jefferson Avenue. On the other hand, if more than 22 million gallons of influent come into the basin, the flap gates at the outfall open and the treated sewage is discharged into the Rouge River. The basin can discharge 16,500 gallons per second. Well, you should know probably the event that took place this week is that you're one of 1 million people in Southeast Michigan will know that the out of sight and out of mind facility and the Oakwood CSO was filled during our 3.5 inches of rain this past week. No one else knows that. Thus, the basin and the Oakwood Basin downstream discharged into the river. When 16,500 gallons per second come through these gates, the flaps stick out parallel to the surface of the water. So, where does all the wastewater come from? Well, the name Hubbell-Southfield should give us an idea. We have a map here that shows the Detroit sewer districts. Off to the upper left, in a light gray, blue color, you can see the Hubbell and the Southfield districts side by side, parallel to the Southfield Expressway. They join in the south to one interceptor by Tireman on their way to the retention basin. Incidentally, note the size of the Baby Creek district that we described last week. The information I have from an expert is that the Hubbell-Southfield and the Baby Creek Basin treat about 60 to 70% of the overflow volumes into the Rouge River that come from the city of Detroit. So then, why do we have so much water filling our sewers? Didn't we build them big enough? Well, I'm pleased that Friends of the Rouge arranged to have an excellent example why water fills and overflows our sewers in the Rouge River. Our staff arranged to have more than 3.5 inches of rainfall this past week for our demonstration. And look what happens in the Middle Rouge River near Garden City. Look at April 26th. We had a little bit of rain there, but it was highly localized. And then when Friday morning at 4 o'clock came along, we had what I would call a gully washer. The water level was at 3 feet at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And then by the time it got to 9 o'clock or so in the morning, it was 9 feet deep at that point in Garden City. Well, that is a couple of hours, the water went to about 6 feet in height. Well, it rained 3 times during Friday and Saturday. The rapid increase of depth gives the Rouge River the designation of being a flashy river. The cause of flashiness is a high percentage of impervious surface in the watershed, namely streets, housetops, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots, stores, schools, playgrounds, and many more impervious surfaces. This issue is crucial to Friends of the Rouge. Our organization is constantly seeking ways to increase knowledge and decrease the impact of impervious surfaces in our favorite watershed. During our UnCruise in the past 4 weeks, we have seen how humankind is related to the Rouge River. The concrete channel is a remarkable case study of how we have had a sea change in our thinking and attitude during the past 75 years. After the Great Flood of 1947, the idea for flood control was to get rid of the water as quickly as possible by sending it down a barrier-free chute to the people downstream and let them handle it, combined sewer waste and all. It was a single-minded solution without recognizing that rivers are a complex ecosystem of physical and biological components. Slowly, we've changed our view. We changed our view how we interact with the world. 50 years ago, we mocked the idea that we could have alternatives to managing flooding. Now we've changed our thinking 180 degrees to the view that we should keep our rainwater on site as much as possible with retention basins, with rain gardens, with rain barrels, and reduced impervious surfaces, among the many other infrastructure applications. We have begun to see the river as a gift rather than an object to be used and abused. The lessons we learn would be one of humility rather than arrogance. At the same time, we may wish to ask today, what are we doing that our next generation is going to say, what were they thinking? A century ago, Aldo Leopold wrote in his essay, The Land Ethic, that we should examine all of our decisions in terms of, quote, what is ethically and aesthetically right as well as what is economically expedient. He said a decision is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. Clearly, our treatment of the Rouge River in the past has destroyed the integrity. We have not paid attention to the interrelationships of the river and its creatures. The Rouge has lost its stability because of its flashiness. The rule of thumb is that a river cannot maintain an ecological community if more than 15 to 20% of its land is covered with impervious surfaces. And finally, we have not made it more beautiful. Fortunately, the writers of the restoration document for the Rouge River stated that one of the beneficial use impairments that needs to be restored is aesthetics. The third point, I hope that results of increased integrity, stability, and beauty will be seen by us soon. Well, we've reached the terminus of our excursion tonight. Sally and Paul have given us another good paddling. Next week on September 8th, we'll proceed upstream to look at the restored oxbow at the Henry Ford, describe extension of the Gateway Trail beyond Michigan Avenue, observe the progress of the fish passageway, check out the Henry and Clara Ford Estate with Karen Marzoni, and investigate the floodplain at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. Our thanks to all of you who are friends of the Rouge for continuing to support our goals. And along with my colleagues on the board of directors, we encourage you to join our UnCruise champions. We also thank our guests, Jen, we thank Luther, we thank Paul Powell and David McCord. We are delighted to have our staff behind the scenes. So this concludes our presentation. Thanks, and over to you, Marie.
Thanks, Orin. I think the first one that I'll start with is from Catherine, and I think this is for you, Sally. She wants to know if there was any other interesting plant species found along the edge of the river that you noticed.
No, it's really a wall of Phragmites with some other small shrubs and trees.
The river is basically fenced off. It's not legal to go over the fences and over the railings of the river and to go into those areas for safety reasons. So it doesn't get much examination.
Yeah, I think some of the restoration efforts will include a nice variety of native plants that will be restored in that area. I have a question from Bill, and he asked, does anyone know a date for the flooding of the Rouge that was sometime in the 60s or early 70s? He recalls that Brady Street in Dearborn was flooded all the way up to Garrison. I wasn't alive at that time, so I don't know.
Well, I was. In the summer of 1968, yes, there was a big flood from Brady up to Garrison and beyond, and the apartment building that's there was flooded as well. And the university was blocked off. My colleague at the university at that time had to stay there overnight because he couldn't get home from the university, traveling to just into West Dearborn is all the farther he had to go. The roads were blocked off there for a day or so.
Wow.
In 1947, the water went up to the second floor window in the apartments that are located on Ford Field, just off Brady. They were taking people out of the windows at the second floor into rowboats at that time.
Wow. What a story, Orin. Thanks. And your story about your professor colleague staying at school really feeds into my childhood thought that teachers lived at school. So thanks for that. So I have another question here from Dale, and the question was, have there been any plans or discussions regarding uncovering and restoring buried streams in the watershed? And Dale, we like to call those at Friends of the Rouge ghost streams.
But I know, if you look on our website map, you'll see this wonderful layer that staff member Matthew put together that shows the ghost streams. Because if you look at this map here, you go, well, the Rouge is right there, and you've got all this network of streams. Why are there none over here in Detroit? Well, that's an older community, and they're all underground in tubes. So while the idea there would be nice to daylight them, some of the issues you have, like in Baby Creek is a combined sewer. And so you wouldn't necessarily want to daylight something like that. But I know there has been talk over in Northville about daylighting the Walled Lake branch that meets up with the Johnson Creek. Marie, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and I also know that there recently have been some murmurs of daylighting a creek in Livonia as well. And I think the idea is being popularized in that there's a lot of research that shows that access to surface water is really an economic redevelopment tool. Communities that have open water, rivers, lakes, streams, and they center the city center around these amenities, they actually have this incredible opportunity. And I think the city of Northville is really looking at about a quarter mile of the Walled Lake branch right before it enters Johnson Creek, right at 7 Mile and River in Northville, as an opportunity to reimagine the city of Northville. That development will increase the population of the city of Northville by 15 to 20%. And so they have to be really mindful about the way that they do that development. And there's a lot of people who care about that topic. So stay tuned. I think there's some murmurs for this work continuing. And I think that there could be opportunities in Detroit, but again, not only is it a sewer shed, but you have rivers running under people's houses, under people's large businesses, under skyscrapers. How do you make sense of removing all of those to open a river in such a highly urbanized area? So it's a good thing to think about. And I know some other cities have done this very successfully. I was just in Providence, Rhode Island, and they did that with part of the river that runs through their town a while back. And it's really incredible how much tourism comes out of that. So.
But we do have a question that maybe Luther could answer.
Yeah, I think this is the question for you, Luther. Someone asked, does the CSO facility treat any chemicals that might enter the facility from industrial or commercial sources before it is discharged into the Rouge?
So there are no specific provisions for treating any type of industrial chemicals or waste. Typically, industrial waste is regulated under the pretreatment regulations. So those point source discharges need to meet specific permits that's actually issued by GLWA to those facilities, so that the water discharge doesn't pass through or interfere with the treatment process.
And Luther, just as a follow-up, I thought there were some additional things put in the Oakwood facility because that did still seem to receive some oils and things.
So that's part of the sanitary pump station for monitoring purposes, but there's no specific provisions for any type of. So you're referring probably to the Marathon facility, the refinery that comes through
the Oakwood pumping facility and CSO basin.
Yep.
Thought they had some additional baffles and things to screen out oils.
So there's baffles for, but it's not any type of chemical removable, but there is provisions to hold back any floatables, such as oil and grease.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer, Luke. I appreciate that. Okay, final question of the night from Teresa. And the question is, were the flooding issues that you described are caused or exacerbated by the elimination of Rouge wetlands and floodplains, as well as an increase in impervious surfaces? Or are impervious surfaces the main problem? Teresa says, I know both of these kind of go hand in hand, so I understand that the answer isn't super clear.
I would have to say that both are major contributors. The Rouge River system is mostly lake plain, so it doesn't drain well to begin with. But then when you take the land that we have that's forested or fields that have plants that have really deep roots, especially native plants that absorb a lot of the water, when you remove that, you're removing that capacity, and then you just worsen the problem by adding pavement. And actually, even adding turf grass isn't a whole lot better than pavement because turf grass doesn't absorb a lot of water. So you're right, it's kind of a hand-in-hand thing. Both of them are a problem. It's best if, I mean, first of all, it would be best if we could just preserve a lot more of the land in its natural state so it can do its job. Secondly, if we can limit the amount of paved surfaces and try to do more pervious paving and remove more of that, that would be helpful.